for C. Oops. What we're going to do is we're going to complete the square again, but watch what we're going to solve for. On those last two problems, we had a coefficient out in front, didn't we? We had that 2 out in front of the x squared or the p squared or the m squared, whatever letter it was. We're going to do this again. Remember what the quadratic equation was? This is like the third or fourth time I've written this down. Remember what it was? It started off with what? Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Isn't that what we did the last two problems? Except this a was like a 2, this was whatever it was, a 10, and this was whatever it was, I forget. Okay? Remember that? What we're going to do now, though, watch carefully. Now, just write furiously, okay, when I write this down. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time explaining this. I just want you to see the end result, and I want you to see how we got to the end result. Everybody got that? So write what I'm writing, but you wouldn't have this on a quiz or a test. So let's watch what we're going to do. We are going to solve for x. And we're going to do it by completing the square. Alright? So I'm going to rewrite this so I can do my work right here, starting here. So what do you think the first thing we're going to do if we want to solve for x? No, not yet. What did we do in the last two problems? What was our first step? Divide by a, right. We want to divide by a because we got rid of that 2 before, didn't we? We don't want this right here, so we're going to divide by a. So let's do that. Divide this by a, and we divide everything by a, correct? So that should be familiar, right? We just did that. So that cancels out. What do we have? We got x squared plus, now I'm going to write it like this, watch, b over a x. Isn't that the same thing? Okay, plus c over a equals a, or 0 over a is 0. All right, now what do we want to do? We want to make this into a perfect square, don't we? It's not a perfect square right now, so what do we have to get rid of? The c over a, right. I want to get rid of this. I want to take this and chuck it to the other side. Every single one of these steps I'm doing is going to look familiar. It's a little bit more difficult because we're not dealing with just regular numbers. Okay, we're dealing with variables, but the steps are exactly the same as what we've done before. So let's see what we get now. B over ax plus blank, right? That's a crooked blank. Let's try to make it a little bit better. Equals, if I move this over here, it's going to be negative c over a. All right, here's where it gets a little trickier, but again, the step is exactly the same. How do I complete the square? I take the middle term and I do what to it? I'm definitely going to write this out. Okay, I take the middle term and I take what? Half of it. Right? And then after I take half of it, what do I do to it? I square it. So let's see what we get. We get b over 2a, right? When I take half of it, and then I square it. So what do I get when I square it? b squared over 4, nope, I got to square the 2, 4a squared. So that's what I get when I get half of it and square it. So that's what goes right here. I told you it looks a little uglier, but it's the same step, same exact step. Now, if I do that to the left side, I'm going to also do that to the right side. Okay? I told you, write furiously. I warned you, didn't I? So what are we going to do here? Now we've made this into a perfect square. Again, the steps are exactly the same as what we're doing with a regular completing the square problem. It's just we have variables instead of numbers. So this stays x. This is a plus. How do we get this one right here? Two ways. You could either take the square root of this last one, or you could take half of this one. You get the same thing. So what would you get? b over 2a equals, now what do we have to do here? Add them up, right? Find a common denominator. What's our common denominator here? It's going to be 4a squared. Well, what would you have to multiply this by to get 4a squared? You had to multiply it by 4a. So I'm going to get minus 4ac. What'd you do to this? Didn't do anything, right? Well, yeah, multiplied by 1, but basically you didn't do anything. So plus b squared. Now let's write that here. Let's write, I don't like this minus 4ac first. Let's put the b squared first. Just make it look a little prettier. B squared minus 4ac over, the common denominator is 4a squared. Anybody hanging with me? Okay. All the steps are exactly the same, aren't they? Would you agree? It's just a little more complicated. It's all it is. So now, what's the next step? Get rid of the square. How do we get rid of that? Square root. So we take the square root here, put a plus or minus in front of it, right? And then how do we get rid of this b over 2a? Minus it, right. So I'm going to get minus b over 2a plus or minus. Now look at this. You got a fraction inside the square root, so take the square to the top and the bottom. Well, you can't really simplify the top, so I'm just going to write b squared minus 4ac. Is any of this starting to look familiar to you? Then what's the square root of 4a squared? It's 2a. Now you could just keep it like this, right? I said earlier that you could, or you could put this over what? One common denominator. So look, now this should look familiar to you. Did this in Algebra 2, didn't you? Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac. Check that out. And what did we do? We took the quadratic equation and we made it into the quadratic what? Formula. Right. This is the quadratic formula. Let's write that down. The quadratic formula. And it's a formula because you're solving for a particular variable, right? They say x is equal to this stuff. So if you're solving for x, you're putting numbers into a formula. So you put numbers into a formula, this formula right here, and there you go. Had you seen that before? Had you seen how you got to it? Never?
No.
Alex, you saw it because I taught it to you, didn't I? Did you have me for Algebra 2? You just had me for geometry? Is that right? Oh, I thought you had me for both. Who taught this to you? Ms. Bonsbach? Okay, good. All right, that's good because a lot of Algebra 2 teachers don't show you how you get this formula. They just say, here it is, this is how you use it, have fun, use it. All right? And I think that's a disservice. I think, especially after you learn completing the square, I really think it's important that you go through this whole process and you see where this comes from. All right? And if you go through it slowly, go step by step, I think you can understand how I got every step. So hopefully you wrote it down, and you might want to go through it just to make sure you know how to do this. Now, that was the hardest part. The easiest part is using this thing. Okay, this thing is really, really easy to use. Some people like this better than completing the square. Tiffany said she doesn't. She said she would rather complete the square. And that's actually a little bit unusual because most students say that they would like to rather use the formula. Let's do one. We're going to do one now using the quadratic formula. Okay? And here's a problem. It says x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. Now look, can you solve this by factoring? No, you can't, because 2 times 1, there's no way you can get a 4 out of that, a negative 4, so you can't factor it. Now you could solve this by completing the square, but what do you think I'm going to ask you to do? Solve by what? The quadratic formula, okay? So I'm going to ask you specifically to solve this by the quadratic formula, okay? I don't want you to use the completing the square way to do this. And why did I ask you specifically to do it this way? Because I'm trying to force you into learning both ways, all right? I want you specifically to learn how to solve for this both ways. One by the completing the square, and then one by the formula. Now here's what I like to do. Do you remember that ax squared plus bx plus c? Look at this thing right here. It's in that form, isn't it? What is the a in this equation right here? What is it? Now it's not x squared because it's ax squared. What's the a? It's a 1. The a is the thing that's being multiplied by the x squared. So the x squared is not the a. It's the number that's being multiplied by the x squared. You didn't see it there, but it does exist, doesn't it? Okay? It's like invisible. All right, so it's a 1x squared. You don't have to do this, but I like to do this sometimes. So what is the a? It's 1. I like to list the a, b, and c. All right? Sometimes that's helpful for students to do. What is the b? Negative 4. Very good. It's negative 4. It's not just a 4, is it? Always take that sign in front of it. It's a negative 4. So the b is negative 4. What is the c? It's a 2. All right? So I took my equation. I figured out what my a, that's the a, that's the b, and that's the c. I figured out what my a, b, and c are. I listed them. You don't have to list them, but I like to. I list them so I can see it. And then what am I going to do with that a, b, and c? I'm going to take these and do what to it? Plug it in. That's right. Plug and chug, right? Plug it into this formula, and let's see what we get for x. You ready to do that?
4 plus or minus.
So let's scooch this up a little bit. Well, let's put x equals first. So x equals. Now, it says negative b. Negative b means the opposite of b. So b is negative 4, but what's negative b going to be? It's going to be positive 4. Everybody see that? That's what the negative b means. It means the opposite of whatever your b actually is. So my b was negative 4, but negative 4 is positive 4. Everybody's got that? Plus or minus, square root, and then let's put some numbers in. Now we take the b and we square it. So what's negative 4 squared? Is it negative 16? It's positive 16 because you got to square the negative and the 4, right? So you got to square the negative and you got to square the 4, so it's positive 16. That will always be positive, that b squared. Anytime you square anything, no matter what, if it's negative or positive, it's always going to come out to be positive. Minus 4 times a times c. So our a is 1, so we put a 1 in here. Our c is 2, we put a 2 in there. Plug and chug is all it is, isn't it? Over 2 times a, and our a is a 1. So there you go. That's the formula right there. Now all you got to do is just simplify this thing. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. And most people like simplifying this, okay, rather than completing the square. I don't know. I could go either way. It doesn't make any difference. But I think if you gave me a problem, you said, here, just do this any way you wanted to, I probably would use the formula. Probably would. Completing the square is not a big deal, but I probably would use this. So what do we have? We got 16 minus, what is this? 4 times 2 is 8, right? And that's over 2. Everybody good so far? So we just keep simplifying. That's all we do. Square root of what? 16 minus 8 is 8 over 2. Do we keep it like that? Remember, we have to simplify our answer. Square root of 8 is not simplified. How can we write the square root of 8? 4 times 2, right? You see that? So look what it's going to get. It's going to be 4 plus or minus, what is this? 2 square root of 2, right? Over what? 2. Do we leave it like that? No. All right, because if you look at this, if you split this up, let's split it up just to show you. You might be able to do this in your head, but I'm going to write it out. So that and that are the same thing, aren't they? Why did I write it like this? Because I know something's going to cancel out. 4 over 2 is 2 plus or minus, what's this? That cancels. Square root of 2, and that's your answer. So it's up to you. What do you like better? Do you like using the formula? Some people like using the formula because they would rather just just simplify this thing. Okay, plug everything in and then simplify it. Some people don't like simplifying that. They would rather complete the square. It's fine. But when the problems say use the formula, you must use the formula. Okay, if it says complete the square, or do it by completing the square, you must do it by completing the square. So it's not like I'm just going to look at the answer. I'm going to look at your process. I'm going to look to see, what process you use. And why would I even ask you to do it one way or the other way? Because I want you to learn both ways. That's the key. All right? All right, I'll give you a worksheet, and then you can go. Enjoy your weekend.